In many important ways, Alfred Hitchcock died on April 29th, 1980. However, since then, his movies have taken on a new life. 4 full-length biographies, dozens of scholarly books, you got fan books, children's books, art books, coffee table books, making of books, academic magazines, blogs, and at least one pop-up book have been dedicated to his work. And that's all in addition to articles, monographs, papers, podcasts, treatises, and more. And that doesn't include this magazine, still in publication today. Whatever your interest, whether you're a fan, a scholar, a nerd, a geek, just some guy who likes old movies, there's something for everybody. Publishing Hitchcock is almost an industry in itself. So how do you approach a director who seems all but ubiquitous? Let's dive right in. Many people, myself included, report that when you watch a Hitchcock film, it feels as if the film is also watching you.
Good evening. I've been examining the fingerprints on the inside of your television screen.
That, for me, is the crack, the smack, the buzz of a Hitchcock movie. His films peer into the darkest depths of the human soul, and as we all know, when you gaze into an abyss, it gazes right back at you. With his films, you never forget that the director is right there at your elbow, just off camera, telling a story, not about monsters and devils, but about you. To achieve that effect, he employed a variety of approaches. In each film, there's always a moment in the movie when the director walks right in front of the camera. These cameos let the audience know that he was right there, that he was the author, he was the ringmaster, he was the star of the show. He also dropped Easter eggs and hints about himself in the story, like this scene in Rope that alludes to Notorious, a hit movie that had come out just a couple of years before.
I'll take Cary Grant myself.
Oh, so will I. He was thrilling in that new thing with Bergman. What is it called now? The something of the something. No, that was the other one. This was just plain something. You know, it was sort of, you know.
It was right on the tip of my tongue.
Mine too. It was just plain something, I'm sure. I adored it. And Bergman.
About that scene, Susan Smith takes it to mean that even though he's hiding, the dialogue is bringing him back out into the open. Then again, there are the painterly compositions that draw attention to themselves as creations. These artful scenes invite you to stop and just enjoy the composition, as if you were in a museum appreciating a masterpiece. You can pause a Hitchcock movie at almost any point and see a picture suitable for framing. He'd even mimic actual artworks. Sometimes his characters smash the fourth wall, speaking directly to the audience. Here's an example from The Birds. Melanie Daniels' arrival in Bodega Bay coincides with a series of bird attacks, and locals have started thinking she's in on it somehow.
Who are you? What are you? Where did you come from? I think you're the cause of all this. I think you're evil! Evil!
Who's that woman screaming at? Melanie? She didn't cause anything. But what about you and me? Well, let's see. Okay, so we're the ones who pay good money to go to the movies and see all kinds of crime and violence on the screen. We'd be disappointed if they didn't suffer. When you look at it that way, who's the real cause of all this evil? You also get a feeling of voyeurism from his movies. By means of his camera, we get into private, intimate spaces, often through the window. The action in Psycho is initiated by a seemingly magical moment when we float as if on angel's wings through this window into the bedroom of a two-bit hotel in Phoenix, where our curiosity is rewarded with a view of Janet Leigh in almost all her glory. Later, Norman Bates takes a peek at her too. Then the camera pushes him aside so we can get an even better look at her. Finally, we join her in the Holy of Holies, the shower. And that's the moment when our naughty little impulses get called out. But here's the rub. Hitchcock had been leading us down the path the entire time. Again, as if expressing agency inside the film that we don't have ourselves, the camera retreats from the scene of the crime in shame, its cat-like pace giving us time to savor our fetid cocktail of sexual afterglow, guilt, and also self-righteous judgment, because Marianne is, after all, just another thief. She kinda sorta got what she deserved. In provoking these feelings, Hitchcock's films also jot them down in the Book of Judgment. Even before we walk into the movie, we're getting played by Hitchcock. Few other directors invested as much time and money as he did to develop their notoriety. From the beginning, he cultivated relationships with critics and journalists, and in 1930 he made it official by investing in his own PR firm with a client of one. His strategy culminated in Psycho, when he actually changed the rules of engagement, refusing entrance after the movie started. That was a new thing. As Alice Wax has pointed out, before Psycho, movies ran on a sort of continuous loop, and people could walk into the theater at any time. Get there late? No problem. Stick around and catch the beginning of the movie in the next showing. Not so after Psycho. Hitch insisted that ticket holders see the film right from the beginning. He truly was the showrunner, directing not just his actors, but the audience too.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Alfred Hitchcock. I must apologize for inconveniencing you in this way. However, this queuing up and standing about is good for you. It will make you appreciate the seats inside. It will also make you appreciate Psycho. You see, Psycho is most enjoyable when viewed beginning at the beginning and proceeding to the end. I realize this is a revolutionary concept, but we have discovered that Psycho is unlike most motion pictures and does not improve when run backwards. That is all for now. You may continue to amuse yourselves by staring at the back of your neighbor's neck or watching the tactics of that forthright lady who seems determined to elbow her way to the front of the line.
So all of these effects, the cameos, the stagey framing, the metatextual references, the voyeuristic stories, all added up to one thing, that you were in the hands of a master storyteller. Instead of a campfire, you're gathered around a glowing movie screen. So why did it seem so important to Hitch that he should make movies that would stare back at the audience? It had to be more than a parlor trick. Think of all the references to theater in his films, or of all the people and situations that turn out to be not what they seem. These tropes and images show up again and again in his films, and it adds up to one conclusion, that Hitchcock's movies are about the world of appearances versus reality, expectations versus actuality. There's almost always a point in his movies when the film turns to swat us on the nose with a hard fact. And it's often the bad guys who are breaking the news to us.
You live in a dream. You're a sleepwalker, blind. How do you know what the world is like? Do you know the world is a foul sty? Do you know if you ripped the fronts off houses, you'd find swine? The world's a hell. What does it matter what happens in it? Wake up, Charlie. Use your wits. Learn something.
Uncle Charlie was right, at least half right. Back then, at the height of World War II, the world did seem to be falling into chaos. Now, today, half a century later, as the world falls apart socially, environmentally, no wonder Hitchcock would say things like,
What is reality? I don't think many people want reality, because reality is something none of us can really stand at any time.
He was describing a bitter truth about the human condition. As all the great mystical religions teach us, there are really only two choices, fantasy and reality. No wonder there's so much money in the fantasy land of movies. In this scene from Sabotage, Mrs. Verloc has just learned that someone dear to her has been violently killed. She retreats into a movie theater to forget her troubles, but she can't. Not for long. So often, Hitchcock's movies lead you down a path of fantasy only to smack you with harsh reality. Like so many philosophers who came before him, Hitchcock saw people sleepwalking through their untroubled, ordinary little lives, sleeping their peaceful little dreams. That tension between fantasy and reality wasn't just an intellectual exercise for him. As someone who lived through 2 world wars, this was an urgent matter. Complacency just isn't an option in modern life. That's why he provided his audiences with beneficial shocks. So that uncanny frisson of being watched by the movie maps right back to his thoughts about reality and fantasy. The questions he raised about that are just as important today as they were nearly 100 years ago when he was raising them himself as a young man. His objective was to create nightmares so powerful that they would wake us from our destructive illusions. He intuited what we later took classes on in Media Studies 101 with insights that are as fresh as today's fake news. So here's how to watch Hitchcock. Watch them the first time for all the fun, spooky, entertaining stuff, And then rewind that DVD and watch it a second time, this time for the deeper stuff, the things that if you aren't careful will have you rethinking your assumptions about life and about reality. In our next video, let's go back to the beginning and talk about how Hitchcock became Hitchcock. And by the way, thank you so much for your support. If you've got a moment, why don't you just take a second and share this Patreon page with your friends?